The tactic employed by the MacDonalds to such lethal effect was the infamous Highland Charge, a headlong running assault perfected by Alistair MacColla, the Devastator himself. Alan Torrance is a member of Clan Athol, a group of enthusiasts dedicated to preserving the old clan way of life. But before any instruction into the notorious Highland Charge, I've got to look the part. My plaid is a 6-yard length of tartan cloth, which doubles as a waterproof jacket and sleeping bag. Leggings for warmth and protection. A bonnet to shield me from sun and rain. Is that the way it goes? To complete the look, Alan tools me up with a targe and dirk. A basket-hilted broadsword completes my fighting ensemble.
Smash.
Alan, why was the Highland Charge so successful?
Well, what made it successful was that the clan's folk would use speed and agility to impact upon their enemy. And that speed and agility often meant that you won the battle.
And by the time firearms came onto the battlefield, by the time muskets were there, was speed just as important?
It was more important. If you think of these disciplined musket firers, they could fire a shot every 25 seconds. So it was very important to get in about them as quickly as possible so that you weren't getting a musket ball about your body.
And now, to put what I've learned to the test, I join Clan Athol in their 21st century version of the deadly Highland Charge. For clan warriors, surviving the ordeal of the real thing must have needed more than just adrenaline. So once you reach the enemy, you have to start fighting hand to hand and you're already exhausted.
Most definitely, and this is where these folk, they were fit. They could cover a lot of ground in a short distance. They were out in the hills every day, their life, so they were used to being fit and strong. If you weren't fit and strong, you didn't survive.
Surviving the MacDonalds' murderous onslaught at Inverlochy was precisely what the Campbells were unable to do. Archibald Campbell, the first Marquis of Argyll, watched the destruction of Clan Campbell from a war galley on the Loch. The army he'd assembled for God and Covenant had been cut to pieces, and as the scale of the defeat became apparent, he slipped his moorings and sailed away, his life and hopes in ruins. But the men he deserted were left to a terrible fate. The MacDonalds gave them no quarter. Fleeing Campbells were channelled along this route, which today forms part of the West Highland Way and is a favourite spot for walkers and tourists. But back in 1645, this was the road to death. The Campbells, wounded and weak, were quickly overtaken and put to the sword by MacColla's bloodthirsty men. As the bodies mounted up, the MacDonalds wearied of the butchery and eventually stopped. Few travellers and tourists who pass this way today can have any idea of the horror and the bloodshed. It represents the agonising low point in the fortunes of Clan Campbell. But the Marquis of Argyll, having survived the slaughter and humiliation of defeat, had revenge on his mind. 2 years after the catastrophe of Inverlochy, the great Campbell chief was back in Argyll with a new army. This Campbell counterattack left a trail of dead, including a bloody massacre at Dunoon, before the main body of MacDonalds was besieged at Dunavity Castle in Kintyre. What happened next was a massacre, made all the more terrible because it was justified by religion. Now, after the castle surrendered, the Protestant army's radical preacher demanded the extermination of all the MacDonalds. Quoting from scripture, he urged the righteous to smite the enemies of the Lord. Those who weren't cut to pieces by cold steel were tied back to back and thrown from the battlements into the sea. A ghastly harvest of death for the Marquis, who's said to have literally walked in the blood of his enemies. Wanton cruelty and bloodletting on such a scale begs the question, How could the Marquis, a man of principle and deeply held religious belief, have either sanctioned or taken part in such a war crime? To help answer this question, I've returned to Campbell country in Argyll to meet Alistair Campbell of Airds. Alistair is a senior member of Clan Campbell and their official archivist. Now the Marquis, this man of principle, this man motivated by religion, he's in charge of Scotland at a time when thousands of people die because of the decisions that he takes. And there are massacres at Dunavity and there's massacres at Dunoon. I mean, how does that square with a man of religion?
Well, first of all, I think it's a bit unfair to ascribe the responsibility to him personally in a particularly bloodthirsty age. I think they have to be put in context with a meeting of the clans that were hostile to Clan Campbell at Cailean Mór, where they entered into a band for the total extirpation of Clan Campbell, genocide, wiped the whole lot out. There'd been the massacre of 100 Campbell men, women and children at Highland Mór, who were shut in a barn that was then set fire to. And both Dunoon and Dunavity were Clan Campbell's response.
At the end of the day, it seems like bloody revenge.
So what is my answer to that? I mean, would you expect anything else?
But it's
particularly in the day and age that we're talking about.
Well, it's not very Christian, is it?
Again, my answer is, so what? And you don't have to look very far today to see the atrocities which are committed round the world by people who are doing it in the name of their religion, and no doubt believe they're doing it with God on their side.
But a day of reckoning would come. After 20 years of civil war, Charles II restored peace and the monarchy in 1661. The Marquis of Argyll's record of armed opposition to the king now put him in mortal danger. He was arrested and put on trial for his life in Edinburgh's Parliament Hall. John Young of Strathclyde University shows me where Argyll faced his accusers. So this is where the Marquis of Argyll was brought when he was put on trial. Who were the people who were judging him?
In the case of Argyll, it was a Scottish Parliament, the newly restored Scottish Parliament with the restoration of the monarchy. So in this room there were nobles, barons and burgesses.
And to what extent could you say that the Marquis of Argyll had to die?
Well, he symbolised the Covenanting Revolution. He symbolised the 1640s. He had powerful aristocratic enemies, several of whom perhaps wanted revenge, but some of them were also frightened of him. Argyll was better dead than alive, and alive Argyll was still potentially a dangerous political rival. And for some people, his execution and death symbolised the sin and the guilt of the nation.
This sin and shame was atoned for by the blood of the Marquis, who was executed on the morning of the 25th of May, 1661. After the cold steel had done its work, Argyll's severed head was placed on a spike at the toll booth for public display. But what of the legacy of this great clan chief? I think it's true that history has not been fair to the Marquis of Argyll or to the Campbell reputation. In his lifetime, he faced the conflicting claims of loyalty to the crown and to religion. The Marquis stuck to his principles, but it cost him his life. Facing the crowds who'd come to watch his execution, Archibald Campbell echoed Christ's words on the cross. "Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He wasn't afraid to die. He had God on his side.